Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Bonner, and today I will be going over Paula Zahn and the River of Sorrow. So, a brief introduction: Shipper was brutally killed with a hatchet while fishing during her day off on June 1st, 2011, at the Platte River Falls Conservation Area along the Platte River in Missouri. She was apparently murdered by somebody that she knew, a coworker of hers. The murderer was 23-year-old Quentin Odell. Odell pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, first-degree assault, 2 charges of armed criminal action, 1 count of first-degree assault, and deviant sexual action. For his plea, Odell was spared the death penalty, but is now serving life in prison. A picture of Shepard is on the left, and a picture of Odell is on the right. So the murder itself. Shepard went fishing on her day off in the Platte Falls Conservation Area when she was hit once in the head, which made her collapse. Odell struck Shepard on the back of the head with a hatchet. She then reportedly collapsed on the ground, crying, and then got down on his knees and repeatedly struck her in the face with the hatchet until she was no longer crying or breathing. Odell then pulled Shepard's body into the river. Police launched an arduous investigation, but due to most of the DNA being washed away because the body was in the river for so long, there were no clues or pieces of evidence to follow. So, a brief time after the murder of Shepard, 6 months passed. Odell stayed under the radar. Police initially questioned him as a co-worker of Shepard, but found no reason for suspicion at the time. The investigation nearly went cold until the officers responded to a stabbing in Farrellview, Missouri. So, confession to the crime and leading to another. The Shepard investigation nearly went cold until officers responded to a stabbing in Farrellview, as I said. A young woman, Brittany Costello, was found disemboweled and unconscious, but she survived the attack. After remaining consciousness, Costello identified Odell as her attacker. Costello's boyfriend ended up confirming that Odell had been alone with her in their apartment that night. This led to Odell's arrest. During his questioning, he confessed to murdering Alyssa Shepard. Odell also pleaded guilty to a sexual assault crime on a woman in her own home. Two went out for a night of drinking, and he used a razor blade to cut open her abdomen and have her intestines run out onto the floor. So now with every crime, you have to break the news. After some investigations, officers had to give the terrifying call to Alyssa's family, that their daughter was dead. Her father, Landis, said that her boss at the store she worked at called him and said, "You need to call the police. It's bad news about Alyssa." No one could even give Landis any information about what had happened because nobody truly knew what had happened except for the fact that she was dead. Landis also had to tell both of her siblings, that their baby sister had been killed, and they were all in a state of shock, as they should be. Their child was dead. Police investigators sometimes dread giving family the news because it leaves the families vulnerable, because their worst fears are coming true. Something bad's happened to someone that they love. So, analyzing the murder with Paula Zahn. When Shepard's body was found in the river after she was killed, there were some key notes that investigators had made. They tried to get as much evidence as they could, but a lot of it was washed away from being stuck in the water for multiple days. Upstream, there was a lot of blood on the riverbank, a pair of torn up flip-flops. Her bathing suit bottoms also ripped off of her body, as investigators found. Officers also found footsteps on a route to around where the murders happened. Police Sergeant Russell Smith ended up saying that there was a sense where she was attacked from behind. The murderer was suspected of getting rid of all physical evidence from the killing, leaving detectives with not a lot to analyze. So in a way, the murderer was smart, getting rid of all the physical evidence that could have been tied back to the murder, so he couldn't be caught. So the murder weapon. The weapon that they thought was the right one was a hatchet that they eventually retrieved and put in an envelope to research any DNA that could be found on it. However, like I said, there was a lot of time in between the investigation and finding all this evidence. So the weapon was in the bottom of the lake for so many days, there was no DNA found in it at all. But a suspicion was that the blades that were found, that the blade that was found were the same ones that were on Alyssa's body. Again, this is a start, but this was a large crime scene. Investigators were picking up anything that they could use to try to get any evidence on who had killed Alyssa Shepard. So 2 receipts, which ended up causing them to make a timeline. While searching Shepard's car, investigators found 2 separate receipts that helped them piece together where she could have gone before she died. The first one was she was buying fishing lure because she was going fishing on her day off. The other was just her getting some snacks at a convenience store. Using timestamps that were found on the receipts, along with one of her good friends telling police that they were going to hang out at around 5 o'clock, they had come to the conclusion that she was killed from 2:45 p.m. to around 5 in the evening. The creation of this timeline helped investigators piece together the last events of Alyssa's life before she was killed. So you might be asking, why would you make a timeline? Why are they so important? So timelines are important because they help investigators get a sense of what the victim was doing before they were killed. So you could be killed in the evening like Shepard was, and you could go out to a restaurant or go out to a store or something, and you could figure out like, oh, they went out to lunch at 2:30, and then they went shopping at 4:45. So that means they weren't around from 2:40 to 4:45. So obtaining suspects. Investigators spoke with people who knew Alyssa very, very well. The first main suspect who they thought was an on-again, off-again boyfriend, and a lot of her family members had a very sneaking suspicion that it was him. A lot of her family members said that he was a controlling boyfriend, did not take the breakup well, he was not mentally well after the breakup, and those all could be a motive to kill. The ex-boyfriend was basically getting to a point of stalking her, like going wherever she was, following her. So she told her brother, and then Alyssa ended up contacting the local police. He was seen on the night of the murder, but he was completely covered in mud, which is very suspicious for a murder by a lake. He was very nervous, and it seemed that he did not want to talk to the police when they brought him in for any type of questioning. So investigators asked where he was during the time of the murder. He said that him and a buddy were fishing along the same river where Alyssa was killed. Police they were sketchy of it about the potential alibi, and then he ended up going on bringing up the fact that he had a very volatile temper. And their suspicion grew even more. They asked him to take a voice stress exam, which is something used to try to find any cracks in the story. Like if bringing up certain aspects of the crime, they could maybe figure out like what he was doing, see if he was lying. However, he remained strong and he passed. But because of all this, after this murder and the other murder from the drunken night out, police had come to the conclusion that it was indeed the same person. So now the forensic analytics. So forensic psychology was a key component in guiding the investigation. FBI profilers analyzed crime scene behavior to construct a psychological profile for the perpetrator. The brutal nature of the attack suggested emotional rage and escalating violence. Profilers identified that the attacker likely knew the victim or operated within her environment, aiding in narrowing down her suspects. Psychological insight helped link Odell to both the Shepard murder and Costello's assault. Rand Corporation highlights that many investigations relied heavily on eyewitness testimony and circumstantial evidence. However, with limited forensic capabilities and this murder with no eyewitnesses around, police had to rely on whatever physical evidence they could obtain. But with modern advances in DNA testing, forensic pathology, crime scene management have provided more scientific methods for solving crimes. So now the validation of the murder confession. Investigators thoroughly validated Odell's confession by cross-referencing it with forensic and crime scene evidence. He provided accurate, specific details, including the weapon, which ended up being confirmed the hatchet, the location, which confirmed to be the Platte Falls Conservation Area, and the time of the attack. These details matched physical evidence such as blood patterns, wounds, and environmental traces. He also mentioned facts that weren't made public, increasing the credibility of his statement. The consistency between his confession and the crime scene strengthened the case legally through the evidence that the police had found. So the survivor's testimony. Brittany Costello's survival and testimony were very instrumental in proving the case. She identified Odell as the attacker after recovering from all of her injuries. So a lot of similarities between Shepard and Costello's Shepard's attack, targeting young women in vulnerable settings, like getting her drunk or being out in the open with nobody around fishing. The extreme use of hands-on violence, like with the hatchet and with the razor blade. A pattern of trust, followed by betrayal and brutality. As Shepard was an ex-girlfriend, and Costello was a friend that she got drunk with. This matching modus operandi, or MO, helped link Odell to both of the crimes. So in the aftermath, as I said earlier, Odell confessed to the murder of Alyssa Shepard and to the brutal attack on Brittany Costello. He was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in the Shepard killing, and first-degree assault and armed criminal action for the Costello assault. Alyssa Shepard's family did not want to look for the death penalty, though. As Landis, her father, said, "I'm relieved that it's all over with. He had to make a decision about whether he wanted to seek the death penalty or not, and we just wanted it to be over with. We didn't want it to be dragged through court." This is my works cited.